The corridors of Thornfield Manor had known centuries of whispered secrets and silent suffering, but none so acute as that of Eleanor Blackwood. The young woman's breath came in ragged gasps as she pressed herself against the damp stone wall, clutching her trembling hands to her chest. Moonlight filtered through a nearby window, casting elongated shadows across the worn flagstones. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight, each hollow toll like a death knell echoing through the cavernous halls. She should have been more careful. The Ming dynasty vase, Lady Thornfield's prized possession, now lay shattered beyond repair in the drawing-room. Eleanor had only been dusting, her movements careful and precise as always. But then the screams had begun from the servants' quarters, startling her so badly that the vase had slipped from her grasp. "Worthless girl!" Mrs. Hargrove's voice slithered through the darkness before the housekeeper herself appeared, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Did you truly believe you could hide from your punishment?" Eleanor straightened her spine, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "It was an accident, Mrs. Hargrove. There were screams and I—" "Excuses," the housekeeper spat, her fingers closing around Eleanor's slender wrist with bruising force. "Lady Thornfield has demanded justice, and you shall receive it." The walk to Lady Thornfield's private chamber felt interminable. Eleanor's thoughts raced to the orphanage, where she had spent her first 16 years, before being sold into service at Thornfield Manor 2 years ago. The Sisters of Mercy, they called themselves, though mercy was scarce within those walls. Still, even their punishments paled in comparison to Lady Thornfield's creative cruelties. The lady herself was waiting, resplendent in a crimson dressing gown that complemented the ruby pendant gleaming at her throat. Her beauty remained remarkable despite her 40 years, skin like porcelain, raven hair without a strand of grey, and eyes that seemed to shift between blue and violet depending on her mood. Now they appeared almost black with rage. "There she is," Lady Thornfield purred, setting aside her crystal glass of wine. "The clumsy orphan who destroyed a priceless heirloom that has been in my husband's family for 12 generations. Eleanor kept her gaze lowered. "My deepest apologies, my lady. I will work without wages to—" The slap came without warning, snapping her head sideways and sending her stumbling against a bookshelf. Several leather-bound volumes tumbled to the floor, adding to her offense. "You think you can repay me?" Lady Thornfield laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "That vase was worth more than you would earn in 3 lifetimes of servitude." Mrs. Hargrove's thin lips twisted into a smile. "Shall I fetch the cane, my lady?" "Indeed, and send for Beaumont. I want him to witness this. Perhaps it will finally convince him that our staff requires a firmer hand." Eleanor's blood ran cold at the mention of Beaumont Thornfield, the lady's only son and heir to the estate. She had caught glimpses of him during her 2 years at the manor, a tall figure with his mother's dark hair and a perpetual expression of boredom. Unlike his mother, he rarely spoke to the servants, treating them with neither cruelty nor kindness, but rather a distant indifference that somehow felt worse. Mrs. Hargrove returned minutes later with both the dreaded cane and young Master Thornfield, who stood silhouetted in the doorway. He wore evening attire, as though he had been out, his white shirt a stark contrast to his black tailcoat. His face remained partially obscured by shadow. "Mother," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle, "is this really necessary at such an hour?" "It is precisely necessary," Lady Thornfield replied. "Come in and close the door. This girl has destroyed the Ming vase. Yes, the one your father treasured. She must learn that actions have consequences." Eleanor stared at the intricate pattern of the Persian rug beneath her feet, wishing it might open and swallow her whole. The cane whistled through the air before striking her shoulders, forcing a pained gasp from her lips. Another blow followed, then another. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, determined not to cry out. "Look at her," Lady Thornfield said with disgust. "Stubborn even in punishment. Perhaps we should dismiss her altogether. Send her back to whatever gutter spawned her." The thought of returning to the orphanage, or worse, the streets, momentarily overwhelmed Eleanor's physical pain. "Please," she whispered, the word escaping before she could swallow it. "I have nowhere else to go. You should have considered that before destroying irreplaceable treasures," Lady Thornfield replied coldly. "Another 6 strokes, Mrs. Hargrove, and ensure they leave marks. I want her to remember this lesson." The housekeeper raised the cane again, but Beaumont stepped forward. "Mother, enough. The vase can be replaced. Father had already arranged for a replica to be made years ago. He feared the original too fragile to remain on display." Lady Thornfield's eyes narrowed. "That is hardly the point, Beaumont. The girl must learn—" "I believe she has learned," he interrupted, his tone suddenly firmer. "Look at her." For the first time, Eleanor dared to raise her eyes, finding Beaumont Thornfield studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. In the candlelight, his features seemed unusually sharp, his skin almost luminous in its pallor. But it was his eyes that held her, dark as midnight, with an unfathomable depth that suggested either profound wisdom or profound emptiness. "Very well," Lady Thornfield finally conceded, though her expression suggested the matter was far from settled. "Mrs. Hargrove, return the girl to her quarters. She will work double shifts tomorrow without meals." "Yes, my lady," the housekeeper replied, gripping Eleanor's arm and pulling her toward the door. As they passed Beaumont, Eleanor felt rather than saw him stiffen, his nostrils flaring slightly. For a brief, impossible moment, she thought his eyes flashed crimson in the candlelight, a trick of her pain-addled mind, surely. Back in the cramped attic room she shared with 3 other maids, Eleanor carefully removed her uniform, wincing as the fabric stuck to the welts forming across her back and shoulders. Annie, the youngest of the maids at barely 15, silently offered a damp cloth. "What happened?" she whispered, her freckled face pinched with concern. "I broke the vase in the drawing room," Eleanor replied, pressing the cool cloth to her burning skin. "The Ming one?" "Oh, Ellie." Annie's eyes widened. "You're lucky she didn't kill you outright. Lady Thornfield values those trinkets more than human life." Eleanor managed a weak smile. "Master Thornfield intervened, strangely enough. Otherwise, I suspect the punishment would have continued until dawn." Annie's expression shifted to one of surprise. "The young master? He never involves himself in household matters. How peculiar." Later, as the other girls slept, Eleanor lay awake, replaying the evening's events. The memory of Beaumont Thornfield's eyes lingered uncomfortably in her mind. There had been something predatory in his gaze, something that reminded her of the wolves she had once glimpsed in the woods beyond the orphanage, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Sleep eventually claimed her, bringing with it dreams of blood-red moons and shadows that moved independently of their owners. She woke with a start just before dawn, her nightgown damp with sweat, despite the autumn chill that permeated the attic room. A strange metallic scent hung in the air, and Eleanor could have sworn she heard the soft click of the door latch settling into place, as though someone had just departed. The next day passed in a blur of aches and hunger. True to Lady Thornfield's command, Eleanor worked from before sunrise until well after sunset, without so much as a crust of bread. Mrs. Hargrove seemed to take particular pleasure in assigning her the most strenuous tasks: scrubbing floors, beating carpets, polishing silver, each movement reopening the wounds from the previous night's caning. By evening, she was lightheaded and trembling, barely able to stay upright as she carried a stack of freshly laundered linens to the guest wing. The corridor seemed to stretch and contract before her eyes, the flickering gaslights creating dizzying patterns on the wallpaper. "You should be resting." The voice came so suddenly that Eleanor nearly dropped her burden. She turned to find Beaumont Thornfield standing at the intersection of 2 hallways, watching her with that same unsettling intensity from the night before. "Master Thornfield," she murmured, attempting a curtsy despite her armload of linens. "I'm nearly finished with my duties," He moved closer, his footsteps unnaturally silent on the carpeted floor. "You're swaying where you stand, Miss Blackwood," she supplied. "Eleanor Blackwood." "Miss Blackwood." He pronounced her name carefully, as though tasting it. "You've been denied food today, haven't you?" Eleanor hesitated. To complain about her punishment would only invite more trouble. "I'm quite all right, sir." Something like anger flashed across his features, so quickly she almost missed it. "Follow me," he said abruptly, turning and walking away without waiting for her response. Confusion warred with caution, but Eleanor found herself trailing after him down a narrow servants' passage she had never noticed before, and into a small study lined with books from floor to ceiling. A fire crackled in the grate, casting the room in a warm, amber glow. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a leather armchair that looked more expensive than everything Eleanor had ever owned combined. "Sir, I couldn't possibly—" "Sit," he repeated, more gently this time. "Before you collapse." She perched on the edge of the chair, still clutching the linens to her chest like a shield. Beaumont disappeared through a side door, returning moments later with a silver tray bearing bread, cheese, and a steaming bowl of soup. "Eat," he said, setting the tray on a small table beside her. Eleanor stared at the food, then back at him. "Why are you doing this?" He moved to the fireplace, resting one arm against the mantel. In the firelight, his features seemed almost too perfect, like a statue carved by a master's hand. "Because cruelty disgusts me, particularly when disguised as discipline. Your mother would not approve," Eleanor said carefully. A smile ghosted across his lips, revealing teeth that seemed unnaturally white and sharp. "My mother and I disagree on many things, Miss Blackwood. Her treatment of the household staff ranks high among them." Hunger finally overcame propriety, and Eleanor set the linens aside to reach for the bread. It was still warm, the crust crackling pleasantly as she tore off a piece. The soup was rich with herbs and vegetables, and she had to force herself not to gulp it down like a starving animal. "Better?" Beaumont asked after she had eaten most of what he provided. Eleanor nodded, suddenly embarrassed by her appetite. "Thank you, sir. You're very kind." "Kind?" He seemed genuinely puzzled by the description. "No, I don't believe anyone has ever accused me of that particular virtue." Before she could respond, the clock on the mantel chimed 9 times. Eleanor rose quickly, gathering the linens. "I should return to my duties, or Mrs. Hargrove will—" "Mrs. Hargrove will do nothing," Beaumont interrupted. "I've already informed her that you're assisting me with cataloguing some books tonight. But rest assured, Miss Blackwood, you're not the first servant I've sheltered from my mother's excessive punishments, nor will you be the last." He moved toward a bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines. "Though I must admit you're the first to capture my interest so thoroughly." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't understand, sir." He selected a volume and turned back to her. "No, I suppose you wouldn't. Not yet." He held out the book, a leather-bound collection of poetry. "Take this. I've found reading provides excellent escape when reality becomes unbearable." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the book, and Eleanor gasped at the icy coldness of his skin. Beaumont withdrew his hand quickly, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You should go now," he said, his voice suddenly distant. "Use the servants' passage. It will take you directly back to the main corridor." Clutching both the linens and the book, Eleanor hesitated at the door. May I return your book when I've finished reading it?" For a moment, Beaumont looked almost vulnerable, an expression so at odds with his usual composure that Eleanor wondered if she had imagined it. "Yes," he finally said. "I should like that very much." As she slipped back into the corridor, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just transpired, though she couldn't begin to articulate what. She had almost reached the end of the hallway when a cold draft raised goosebumps along her arms. Turning, she found the corridor empty, yet the distinct sensation of being watched prickled at the back of her neck. In the shadows cast by a suit of armor, Eleanor could have sworn she saw a pair of crimson eyes gleaming like coals. She blinked, and they were gone, if they had ever been there at all. That night, long after the other maids had fallen asleep, Eleanor opened the book Beaumont had given her. A folded note slipped from between the pages, written in an elegant, archaic hand. Miss Blackwood, there are secrets at Thornfield Manor that would chill your blood to know. You have unwittingly found yourself at the center of something ancient and dangerous. Watch the shadows carefully and trust no one, least of all myself. Meet me in the library tomorrow at midnight if you wish to learn the truth. Come alone or do not come at all. Until then, guard your throat and your dreams with equal vigilance. B.T. Eleanor read the note 3 times, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else. Something that felt dangerously like anticipation. Outside, clouds parted to reveal a blood-red harvest moon, and somewhere in the darkness beyond her window, a wolf howled a lonely greeting to the night. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she folded the mysterious note and slipped it beneath her thin mattress. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind consumed with questions. Why would the young master take such interest in a mere servant? What secrets could possibly lurk within Thornfield Manor's ancient walls? And most troubling, why had he warned her to guard her throat? Morning came too quickly. Eleanor moved through her chores mechanically, wincing as her still tender wounds protested each movement. Throughout the day, she caught herself searching for Beaumont in the hallways and stairwells, but he remained conspicuously absent. Lady Thornfield, however, seemed omnipresent, her critical gaze following Eleanor's every movement. "You've missed a spot," the lady remarked coldly as Eleanor polished the banister in the main hall. "One might think your punishment yesterday taught you nothing about thoroughness." Eleanor bowed her head. "Forgive me, my lady. I'll be more careful." Lady Thornfield stepped closer, her perfume, an overwhelming blend of roses and something metallic, enveloping Eleanor like a suffocating cloud. "I understand my son intervened on your behalf last night." Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. How curious that Beaumont would take interest in someone so insignificant. Eleanor kept her eyes downcast. "He merely required assistance with some books, my lady." "Books?" Lady Thornfield laughed, the sound like ice cracking. "Is that what he told you?" She reached out, tilting Eleanor's chin upward with one perfectly manicured finger. Her nail, painted a deep crimson, pressed uncomfortably against Eleanor's skin. "My son has peculiar appetites, Miss Blackwood. I would advise caution in private dealings with him." Before Eleanor could respond, the front doors swung open, admitting a blast of autumn air and a tall figure in a travelling coat. Lord Thornfield had returned from London 2 weeks earlier than expected. His imposing frame filled the entryway, silver streaking his dark hair at the temples. Unlike his wife and son, his complexion was ruddy, his eyes a warm hazel that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "My dear," he called to his wife, "what a dreary welcome. No servants at the door to take my coat." Lady Thornfield's demeanour transformed instantly, her face softening into a mask of wifely devotion. "Richard, we weren't expecting you until the 15th. She glided toward him, offering her cheek for a kiss. "The staff has been particularly incompetent lately. This one," she gestured dismissively toward Eleanor, "broke the Ming vase just yesterday." Lord Thornfield's expression darkened momentarily before settling into resigned amusement. "That ghastly thing? I've been hoping for an accident to befall it for years." He winked conspiratorially at Eleanor. "Well done, girl." "Richard," Lady Thornfield hissed, "the staff will think they can destroy our possessions without consequence." Lord Thornfield waved away her concern. "Josephine, it was an ugly vase, with an exaggerated provenance. I've seen better reproductions at country fairs." He turned to Eleanor. "What's your name, child?" "Eleanor Blackwood, my lord," she replied, dipping into a curtsy. "Miss Blackwood, I trust my wife didn't punish you too severely for this supposed transgression." His eyes, though kind, seemed to see more than Eleanor was comfortable revealing. Eleanor hesitated, caught between truth and self-preservation. I merely had her work additional hours, Lady Thornfield interjected smoothly, a fair consequence for carelessness. Lord Thornfield's gaze lingered on Eleanor for a moment longer, as though he knew his wife was lying but chose not to challenge her. Very well. Where is Beaumont? I've brought him some interesting manuscripts from the British Museum. Resting, I believe, Lady Thornfield replied. His condition has been troubling him again. Something unspoken passed between husband and wife, a tension that Eleanor couldn't decipher but felt acutely. Lord Thornfield nodded once, his expression grave. I see. I shall look in on him before dinner. As Lord Thornfield departed for his study and Lady Thornfield swept upstairs, Eleanor returned to her polishing, mind racing. Condition. What ailment could afflict someone as seemingly robust as Beaumont Thornfield? And why did his father appear so troubled by the news? The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. As midnight approached, Eleanor found herself torn between curiosity and caution. She had managed to exchange shifts with Annie, claiming fatigue from her punishment, which allowed her to retire early to their shared room. Now, as the manor grew quiet, she slipped from beneath her covers, already dressed in her uniform. "Where are you going?" Annie's whisper startled her. Eleanor hesitated. I forgot to finish polishing the silver in the dining room. Mrs. Hargrove will have my hide if it's not done by morning." Annie frowned. "You're a terrible liar, Ellie. Is it about the young master? The other girls have noticed how he looks at you, how he—" Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm just doing my job." "Be careful," Annie warned, her young face suddenly serious. "There are rumors about him, about why he's rarely seen during daylight hours, why he never eats with the family when there are guests." "What sorts of rumors?" Eleanor asked, her hand on the doorknob. Annie glanced nervously at their sleeping roommates. "They say he came back wrong after his time abroad. Some of the older servants claim they've heard strange noises from his wing of the house. Sounds like animals feeding." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "And Martha swears she once saw him drinking something dark and thick from Lady Thornfield's ruby goblet. She said his mouth was stained red afterward like wine, but thicker." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine, but she forced a laugh. "You've been reading too many penny dreadfuls, Annie. Master Thornfield is just eccentric, like many wealthy young men." Annie didn't look convinced. "Just remember, no one ever sees the Thornfield groundskeeper and the young master at the same time. And livestock has gone missing from neighboring farms ever since Master Beaumont returned from Hungary 3 years ago." With a final reassuring smile that felt brittle even to herself, Eleanor slipped into the corridor, Annie's warnings echoing in her mind. The manor was eerily silent as she navigated the servants' passages toward the library. Gaslights had been extinguished for the night, leaving only occasional moonbeams through windows to guide her way. The library doors stood partially open when she arrived, a sliver of warm light spilling into the darkened hallway. Eleanor hesitated, her hand raised to knock. From within came the sound of hushed, urgent voices, Beaumont's and another she recognized as Lord Thornfield's. "Cannot continue this way, Beaumont," Lord Thornfield was saying. "Your mother enables your worst impulses, but I see the toll it takes. This is no life." "What would you have me do, father?" Beaumont's voice carried a bitter edge. "End it all? Join mother in her particular form of existence? Neither option appeals. There are treatments now, modern approaches." "Bloodletting and mercury poisoning, you mean? I've survived this long by my own methods." "And those methods include involving innocent young women in your dark world. First the Williams girl, now this Blackwood orphan." Eleanor's breath caught. They were discussing her. "Eleanor is different," Beaumont insisted. "She has strength the others lacked. Besides, she deserves to know what danger surrounds her in this house." Lord Thornfield sighed heavily. "Your mother will never allow it. You know how territorial she becomes. Mother doesn't own her. None of you own any of them, though you pretend otherwise with your contracts and positions. Be careful, my son. Your mother's jealousy is not to be trifled with. If she suspects your interest is more than passing—" The floorboard beneath Eleanor's foot creaked, silencing the conversation instantly. Heart pounding, she knocked tentatively on the door. "Enter!" Beaumont called, his voice controlled once more. Eleanor stepped into the library, finding Beaumont alone, lounging in a leather armchair beside the hearth. Of Lord Thornfield there was no sign, though the second brandy glass on the side table betrayed his recent presence. "Miss Blackwood," Beaumont greeted her, rising with fluid grace. "You came." "You invited me," she replied, remaining near the door, "though I'm beginning to question the wisdom of accepting." His lips curved into that ghost of a smile she had noticed before. "Wisdom rarely leads us to the most interesting experiences in life." He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please, sit. I imagine you have questions." Eleanor moved cautiously toward the offered chair, hyper-aware of Beaumont's gaze following her. "I overheard your conversation with Lord Thornfield." If this admission surprised him, he didn't show it. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to know I'm not the first innocent young woman you've involved in whatever this is," she replied, meeting his eyes directly. "What happened to the Williams girl?" Something dark flickered across Beaumont's features. "Sophia Williams was a housemaid here 3 winters ago. She was curious, like you. Unfortunately, her curiosity led her into situations beyond her understanding." He paused. "She no longer works at Thornfield. Did she leave or was she removed?" Eleanor pressed. "A distinction without much difference in the end," he replied enigmatically. "But I don't wish the same fate for you, which is why I've asked you here." He leaned forward, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Tell me, Miss Blackwood, what do you know of vampires?" Eleanor blinked, certain she had misheard. "Vampires? You mean like in Mr. Stoker's novel?" "Stoker romanticized much and understood little," Beaumont said dismissively. "But the fundamental premise is sound enough. Creatures that subsist on blood, shun daylight, possess unnatural strength and longevity." "You can't seriously expect me to believe such things exist," Eleanor said, though Annie's warnings echoed uncomfortably in her mind. Beaumont studied her for a long moment. "What you believe is less important than what is true. This house harbors secrets older than either of us, Miss Blackwood. My mother—" The library door swung open without warning, revealing Mrs. Hargrove, her thin face contorted with suspicion. "There you are," she exclaimed, glaring at Eleanor. "Sneaking about in the night, meeting the master clandestinely. I knew you were trouble from the moment you arrived." Beaumont rose smoothly. "Mrs. Hargrove, I requested Miss Blackwood's assistance. Any impropriety is my responsibility alone." The housekeeper's expression shifted from anger to something closer to fear as she addressed Beaumont. "Forgive me, sir, but Lady Thornfield was quite clear about staff fraternization. This girl has already broken valuable property. Now she violates household rules by being out of quarters after hours." "Is my mother aware of this meeting?" Beaumont asked quietly. Mrs. Hargrove's hesitation was answer enough. "I thought not," he continued. "You may go, Mrs. Hargrove. I will escort Miss Blackwood back to her quarters myself when our business is concluded." For a tense moment, it seemed the housekeeper might argue. Instead, she dipped into a stiff curtsy. "As you wish, Master Thornfield. But Lady Thornfield will hear of this." After Mrs. Hargrove departed, Eleanor rose nervously. "Perhaps I should go. I don't wish to cause more trouble." "Trouble found you the moment you entered Thornfield Manor," Beaumont replied. "But you're right. We shouldn't continue here. My mother has too many eyes and ears among the staff." He moved to a bookshelf and pressed against an ornate wooden panel which slid open to reveal a hidden passage. "This leads to the east wing. We can speak more freely in my study." Eleanor hesitated. "I don't think—" "Please," Beaumont interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically urgent. "What I must tell you cannot wait, and we may not have another opportunity. Mrs. Hargrove will report to my mother, and then—" He left the sentence unfinished, but the gravity in his expression conveyed enough. Against her better judgment, Eleanor followed him into the passage. The panel closed silently behind them, plunging them into darkness so complete she could see nothing. Beaumont's cold hand found hers, guiding her forward. "How can you see?" she whispered, astonished as he navigated the pitch-black corridor without hesitation. "Another advantage of my condition," he replied cryptically. "Watch your step here. There's a slight rise." They emerged minutes later into a circular room unlike any Eleanor had seen in the manor. Where the main house favoured heavy Victorian furnishings and dark woods, this space was almost Spartan, walls lined with books and strange artifacts, a simple desk of pale wood, and windows draped in heavy black velvet to block any hint of outside light. A single oil lamp provided the room's only illumination. Beaumont released her hand and moved to a cabinet, extracting a crystal decanter filled with dark red liquid. "Would you care for wine?" he asked, his back to her. "No, thank you." Eleanor remained near the hidden door, poised for escape if necessary. "You were about to explain about your mother and vampires, and why any of this involves me." He turned, glass in hand, and took a deliberate sip of the ruby liquid. "My mother is not what she appears to be. Neither am I, though in different ways." He set his glass down and approached her slowly, as one might a frightened animal. 3 years ago, I accompanied my father on an expedition to the Carpathian Mountains. While there, I contracted what the local physicians diagnosed as a rare blood disorder. "Your condition," Eleanor murmured, remembering Lady Thornfield's words. Beaumont nodded. "My mother was distraught. She had already lost 2 children in infancy before my birth. The idea of losing her only surviving child drove her to desperate measures. There was a countess in the region known for unusual healing practices. Against my father's wishes, my mother took me to her castle." He paused, his expression darkening with the memory. "What happened there changed everything. The countess cured my illness, but the price was higher than anyone could have anticipated. My mother made a bargain that altered not only my fate, but her own." "What kind of bargain?" Eleanor asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "The kind that defies natural law," he replied. "The countess was no ordinary noblewoman, but a creature centuries old who sustained herself on human blood. She offered my mother a choice: watch me die, or allow me to be transformed into something no longer fully human, a dhampir, half vampire, caught between worlds." Eleanor stared at him, searching his face for any sign that this was some elaborate jest. Finding none, she whispered, "And Lady Thornfield. My mother chose to join the Countess in full transformation, believing it would help her protect me. She returned to England as something far more dangerous than the society lady she once was." Beaumont's voice grew bitter. "She feeds on the servants, Eleanor. Those who grow weak and must be sent away for their health rarely recover elsewhere. They simply disappear." Horror washed over Eleanor as pieces began fitting together. The servants who vanished without explanation, the strange anemia that periodically swept through the staff, Lady Thornfield's unnaturally youthful appearance. "And you?" she asked, her throat dry. "Do you also feed?" Beaumont's expression twisted with self-loathing. "I require blood, yes, but I've found alternatives to hunting humans. Farm animals sustain me, though the nourishment is inferior." He gestured to his glass. "And certain preparations can temporarily satisfy the hunger." "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor demanded, fear finally overtaking curiosity. "What do you want from me?" "To warn you," he replied simply. "My mother has noticed my interest in you. She's possessive of what she considers her prey, and jealous of anyone who captures my attention. The last girl I tried to protect, Sophia, became my mother's target. I failed to save her." Eleanor's hand moved unconsciously to her throat. "And you think I'm in danger?" "I know you are," Beaumont said gravely. "Mrs. Hargrove reports everything to my mother. By morning, Lady Thornfield will know of our midnight meeting. She'll see it as a threat to her control over both the household and me. Then I should leave Thornfield, Eleanor concluded, her mind racing through limited options. Tonight. Beaumont shook his head. She would track you. Once my mother fixates on someone, distance provides little protection. Besides, where would you go? Eleanor had no answer. The orphanage wouldn't take her back at 18, and she had no family, no connections beyond Thornfield's walls. There is another option, Beaumont said quietly, moving closer until barely a foot separated them. I could protect you, mark you as under my protection in a way my mother would be forced to respect. Mark me, Eleanor echoed, unease prickling at her skin. A blood bond, he explained. If I take your blood, just enough to create a connection, my mother would recognize you as mine. Among her kind, such bonds are sacred, inviolable. Eleanor stepped back, bumping against the wall. You want to drink my blood? After everything you've just told me about your mother's predation, not to feed, Beaumont clarified urgently, to protect. There's a difference. The amount would be minimal, and I would ensure you felt no pain. Before Eleanor could respond, a distant commotion reached them, raised voices, the sound of running feet. Beaumont tensed, his head tilting as though listening to sounds beyond human hearing. She knows, he whispered. Someone has already informed her. We have little time. The door to Beaumont's study burst open, revealing Lord Thornfield, his face ashen. Beaumont, your mother is coming. She's in a state I haven't seen since Hungary. His eyes widened at the sight of Eleanor. Miss Blackwood, you must hide, now! Beaumont grasped Eleanor's shoulders. The choice is yours. Let me help you, or face my mother's wrath alone. Eleanor's heart pounded so violently she felt dizzy. The entire night seemed like some fever dream. Vampires, blood bonds, ancient bargains. And yet the fear in Lord Thornfield's eyes was real enough. What happens if I agree? She asked Beaumont, her voice steadier than she expected. What becomes of me? You remain yourself, he promised, but with my protection. The bond would allow me to sense your emotions, your location, and you, mine. It creates a connection that even my mother cannot sever. From somewhere below came the sound of glass shattering, followed by an inhuman shriek of rage that made the hair on Eleanor's arms stand on end. She's coming up the east staircase, Lord Thornfield warned. Whatever you're going to do it now. I'll try to delay her, but... He broke off, hurrying from the room without finishing his thought. Beaumont's eyes, normally so dark, now gleamed with an inner light that seemed almost crimson in the lamp's glow. Eleanor, he said softly, her given name sounding like a plea on his lips. Trust me. Please. Outside, thunder rumbled across the sky, and rain began lashing against the windows. The manor itself seemed to hold its breath as Eleanor faced her impossible choice, trust the half-vampire who offered protection, or take her chances with the monster who ruled Thornfield Manor. Yes, she whispered, tilting her head to expose her neck. Do it quickly. Beaumont's cold fingers brushed her skin as he gently turned her face away. Not the throat, he murmured. Too dangerous, too intimate. Instead, he took her wrist, raising it to his lips. This will sting, but only for a moment. Eleanor closed her eyes, her pulse racing beneath his touch. She felt the scrape of teeth against her skin, and then, "Get away from her!" Lady Thornfield's voice crashed through the room like a physical force. Eleanor's eyes flew open to see the lady standing in the doorway, her elegant nightgown billowing around her like smoke. Her face, usually so controlled, had transformed into something barely human. Eyes glowing red, lips pulled back to reveal elongated canines. Beaumont positioned himself between Eleanor and his mother, still holding her wrist. "Mother, stop! This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't concern me." Lady Thornfield laughed, the sound like breaking bones. "Everything in this house concerns me, especially when my son attempts to form blood bonds with my servants." She took a step forward, her movements unnaturally fluid. "Did you really think I wouldn't sense your intentions? That I wouldn't know the moment you brought her into your sanctuary?" Lord Thornfield appeared behind his wife, his face bruised and bleeding from what appeared to be deep scratches. "Josephine, please, remember yourself." She didn't even acknowledge him, her gaze fixed on Beaumont and Eleanor. "Release the girl, Beaumont. She belongs to me, as does everyone under this roof." "No," Beaumont replied, his voice hardening. "Eleanor is under my protection now. You will not touch her." Lady Thornfield's face contorted with fury. "You dare defy me after everything I sacrificed to save you?" She moved with blinding speed, crossing the room in the blink of an eye to seize Eleanor's arm, yanking her away from Beaumont with inhuman strength. Pain shot through Eleanor's shoulder as Lady Thornfield's grip tightened. "Such a plain little thing," the lady hissed, her cold breath washing over Eleanor's face. "What makes you so special that my son would risk everything?" Before Eleanor could respond, Beaumont lunged forward, his own movements preternaturally fast. He grasped his mother's wrist, forcing her to release Eleanor. "Enough!" For a moment, mother and son stood locked in combat, neither yielding. Then, with a snarl of frustration, Lady Thornfield flung Beaumont across the room. He crashed into a bookshelf, sending volumes tumbling to the floor. "You forget yourself, my son," Lady Thornfield said, her voice deceptively calm as she straightened her dressing gown. "Your human half makes you weak. You cannot hope to overcome me." Beaumont rose, seemingly unharmed despite the force of his impact. "Perhaps not alone," he conceded. He glanced at his father, who nodded almost imperceptibly, before withdrawing something from his coat pocket, a small silver case that gleamed in the lamplight. Lady Thornfield's eyes widened in recognition. "Richard, don't you dare!" Lord Thornfield opened the case and withdrew a syringe filled with amber liquid. "I'm sorry, my dear. This has gone far enough." With a hiss of rage, Lady Thornfield whirled toward her husband, but Beaumont seized the opportunity to grab Eleanor's hand. "Run," he whispered urgently. "The passage we came through. Take it back to the library, then the servants' stairs to the kitchen. The back door key hangs by the pantry." "But where should I go?" Eleanor asked, dizzy with fear and confusion. "The gamekeeper's cottage at the edge of the woods. It's abandoned now. My father dismissed him after suspecting he discovered our secret. Wait there for me." He pressed something cold and metallic into her palm, a small key on a silver chain. "This opens the cottage door. Go." As Eleanor fled toward the hidden passage, the sounds of struggle intensified behind her. Lady Thornfield's inhuman shriek echoed through the halls, followed by the crash of furniture overturning. Eleanor didn't look back, her heart pounding in her ears as she raced through the darkness, guided only by her memory of the path they'd taken. Thunder shook the manor as she emerged into the library, now dark and deserted. Rain lashed against the windows as she navigated familiar corridors down to the kitchen. The manor seemed unnaturally silent beyond the storm's fury, as though holding its breath. The key hung exactly where Beaumont had said it would. Eleanor snatched it from its hook and unbolted the back door, stepping out into the violent storm. Rain immediately soaked through her uniform as she ran across the darkened grounds toward the distant tree line, mud sucking at her shoes with each step. Behind her, Thornfield Manor loomed like a crouching beast, its windows dark save for a single light in the east wing, Beaumont's study, where three figures remained locked in a battle Eleanor could barely comprehend. As she reached the edge of the woods, a scream cut through the night, not the angry shriek of Lady Thornfield, but a man's voice raised in pain or terror. Eleanor froze, turning back toward the house just as every window in the east wing blazed with sudden, unnatural blue light. For an instant, the silhouettes of three figures were visible against the glare, two standing, one collapsed on the floor. Then darkness returned, more complete than before. Eleanor clutched Beaumont's key against her chest, rain mingling with tears on her face as she turned and fled into the forest, uncertain which of the Thornfields had fallen and which would come searching for her when the storm cleared. The forest swallowed Eleanor into its darkness, the rain soaking through her clothes as she stumbled forward. Branches whipped against her face and arms, but she pressed on, clutching Beaumont's key like a talisman. The gamekeeper's cottage seemed impossibly distant, a sanctuary she feared she might never reach. Behind her, Thornfield Manor had fallen silent after that terrible flash of blue light. The absence of sound was more frightening than any scream could have been. Who had fallen in that final confrontation? Lord Thornfield, attempting to subdue his monstrous wife. Lady Thornfield, overcome by whatever substance had filled that syringe, or Beaumont himself, caught between his parents in their supernatural struggle. The rain eased slightly as Eleanor finally glimpsed a structure through the trees. A small stone cottage with a thatched roof, half hidden among ancient oaks. Mud squelched beneath her feet as she approached, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the key Beaumont had given her. After several attempts, the lock turned, and she pushed open the weathered door. The interior was Spartan but clean, smelling of wood smoke and dried herbs. Someone had maintained it, despite Beaumont's claim that it was abandoned. Eleanor closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her legs finally giving way as she slid to the floor in exhaustion. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. "What have I become entangled in?" Her wrist tingled where Beaumont had almost, but not quite, completed their bond. Had he managed to taste her blood before his mother's interruption? The skin was unbroken, yet she felt a strange connection to him nonetheless, a phantom awareness that seemed to pull her thoughts back toward the manor. Eleanor forced herself to rise, searching for candles or a lamp. She found both in a cupboard, along with matches and basic provisions, tea, sugar, dried beans. This was no abandoned cottage, but a prepared refuge. Had Beaumont anticipated needing such a sanctuary, or had he sent others here before her? The memory of Sophia Williams haunted her as she lit a small fire in the hearth. What had happened to the previous maid who caught Beaumont's attention? Had she met her end at Lady Thornfield's hands, or had she escaped into the night as Eleanor had? As warmth slowly returned to her limbs, Eleanor explored the cottage more thoroughly. A narrow bed stood in the corner, covered with a patchwork quilt. A small bookshelf held volumes similar to those in Beaumont's study, texts on folklore, ancient histories, and medical treatises. One book lay separate from the others on a small table, a journal bound in red leather. Eleanor hesitated, her hand hovering over the cover. Privacy warred with the desperate need to understand the danger she faced. Need one. She opened the journal, immediately recognizing Beaumont's elegant, archaic handwriting. October 3rd, 1897. Another girl has disappeared from the village. Mother claims ignorance, but the satisfaction in her eyes betrays her. Father grows more desperate with each passing month. His research into the Hungarian formula continues, though I fear whatever he creates will be too late for these innocent souls. My own condition deteriorates. The animal blood sustains me physically, but the hunger for human essence grows more difficult to resist. I find myself watching the maids as they work, tracking the pulse at their throats with a predator's fixation. This is what Mother wants, for me to embrace the monster and join her in her midnight hunts. I would end my life before allowing that transformation to complete itself. Eleanor turned the pages with increasing horror, reading Beaumont's chronicle of his struggle against his vampiric nature and his mother's growing power over Thornfield Manor. December 15th, 1897. Sophia discovered the truth today. She stumbled upon Mother feeding on one of the stable boys. I attempted to shield her, to explain, but Mother's influence was too strong. She has taken Sophia as her personal maid, keeping her close to ensure her silence. The fear in Sophia's eyes when she looks at me now is unbearable. She believes I am like Mother, a predator wearing human guise. Perhaps she is right. A noise outside startled Eleanor from her reading, a branch snapping in the darkness. She extinguished the candle with a quick breath and moved to the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. The rain had stopped, moonlight now filtering through the clouds to illuminate the clearing around the cottage. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, unnaturally still. Even from this distance, Eleanor recognized the elegant posture of Lady Thornfield, her white nightgown ghostly in the moonlight. How had she found the cottage so quickly? Had she followed Eleanor's scent through the forest, like a hound on a trail? Eleanor shrank back from the window, heart pounding. If Lady Thornfield approached, the flimsy door would provide no barrier. She glanced around desperately for a weapon, finding nothing more substantial than a fire poker. Minutes passed with excruciating slowness. When Eleanor dared look again, Lady Thornfield remained motionless, her face turned toward the cottage, as though sensing Eleanor's presence inside. Then, with preternatural grace, she began moving forward, each step deliberate. A shadow separated itself from the darkness behind Lady Thornfield, another figure approaching silently. Eleanor's breath caught as moonlight revealed Beaumont's face, his expression set in grim determination. He moved with the same inhuman speed his mother had displayed in his study, overtaking her before she reached the cottage door. "Mother," his voice carried clearly through the night air. "This ends now." Lady Thornfield turned, a smile playing across her lips. "My darling boy, did you really think that pathetic concoction your father created could subdue me for long?" "Where is father?" Beaumont demanded. Lady Thornfield's laugh chilled Eleanor's blood. "Resting. The exertion of betrayal exhausted him, poor man. If you've harmed him, oh, Richard will recover, physically at least. His spirit may take longer to mend." She reached out to touch Beaumont's cheek, her pale hand luminous in the moonlight. "Why do you persist in this rebellion, my son? The girl is nothing. A servant, a momentary distraction. Come home. Accept what you are." Beaumont caught his mother's wrist before her fingers could make contact. "What I am is my choice, not yours. You made your bargain with the Countess, but you had no right to make mine." "I saved your life," Lady Thornfield hissed, her composure cracking. "You condemned me to a half-life," Beaumont countered, "neither human nor vampire, belonging nowhere. And now you hunt those under our protection, those who serve our family loyally." Lady Thornfield's eyes flashed crimson. "They are cattle, nothing more. Food for our kind." "Listen to yourself," Beaumont said, disgust evident in his voice. "You were not always this creature, Mother. You were kind once, compassionate. I was weak," she spat. "Now I am eternal. As could you be, if you would only complete your transformation." Her voice softened to a seductive whisper. "One human life, taken willingly, Beaumont. That's all it requires. The Countess told us this." Eleanor's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. This was why Beaumont had warned her to trust no one, not even himself. His mother wanted him to take a human life willingly offered, to fully transform into the creature she had become. And Eleanor, isolated and dependent on his protection, would make the perfect sacrifice. She backed away from the window, mind racing. The journal still lay open on the table, its pages possibly containing information that could help her understand what she faced. She returned to it, flipping through frantically until a passage caught her eye. March 8th, 1898. "Father has discovered a potential cure in the Countess's own writings. A ritual requiring the blood of the Creator mixed with blessed silver and the essence of wolfsbane. If performed during the waning crescent moon, it might reverse Mother's condition and, by extension, my own partial transformation. The difficulty lies in obtaining Mother's blood. She suspects Father's research and guards herself carefully. And even if we succeeded, would Mother choose humanity again? The power she now possesses has become her greatest addiction. Sophia has agreed to help us. May God forgive me for involving her in this danger." The entry ended abruptly, with no further mention of Sophia or the attempted cure. Eleanor turned the page, finding only blank paper. Whatever had transpired after this plan, Beaumont had not recorded it, or had removed the pages that contained the outcome. Outside, the confrontation between mother and son continued, their voices rising. "The girl must die," Lady Thornfield declared coldly. "She knows too much. I won't allow it, Beaumont replied. Eleanor is under my protection. Lady Thornfield's laugh was brittle. Protection? You couldn't even complete the blood bond before I interrupted. She is unmarked, unclaimed. According to our laws, she remains fair game. Our laws? Beaumont echoed incredulously. You speak as though you're part of some ancient aristocracy rather than a victim of supernatural parasitism. The slap that followed echoed like a gunshot. Eleanor flinched at the sound, imagining the force behind it, a strength that could shatter bone. You will not speak to me with such disrespect, Lady Thornfield hissed. I am your mother and your maker. Without me, you would be dust in a Hungarian grave. Perhaps that would have been kinder, Beaumont replied quietly. A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant call of an owl. When Lady Thornfield spoke again, her voice had regained its aristocratic composure. You have until dawn to send the girl away from Thornfield lands, she said. After that, I will consider her presence a declaration of war between us. And believe me, my son, you do not want me as your enemy. Eleanor heard the rustle of fabric, then silence. When she dared look out the window again, Lady Thornfield had vanished into the night. Beaumont remained, his face turned toward the cottage as though he knew exactly where she stood watching. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor opened the door. You shouldn't be here, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. It's not safe. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I believe that's my line, Miss Blackwood. He approached slowly, stopping at the threshold. May I enter? Eleanor nodded, stepping aside. As he passed, she caught the metallic scent of blood. You're injured. Beaumont touched his cheek where a deep gash was slowly closing before her eyes. Mother wears rings, designed for more than decoration. Silver. It slows our healing. He glanced around the cottage. I see you found your way without difficulty. Your mother found it too, Eleanor pointed out, closing the door. She was waiting when I arrived. She would have followed your scent. Beaumont confirmed her earlier suspicion. Our senses are heightened. He noticed the open journal on the table and stiffened. You've been reading my private thoughts. I needed to understand, Eleanor replied unapologetically. What happened to Sophia Williams? The journal doesn't say. Pain flickered across Beaumont's features. Sophia died helping my father attempt the cure described in those pages. My mother discovered our plan and he trailed off, unable or unwilling to complete the sentence. She killed her. Eleanor finished for him. Your mother killed Sophia. Beaumont nodded once, his expression haunted. I couldn't protect her. I tried, but I was too weak, too unprepared for my mother's rage. He looked at Eleanor with naked fear in his eyes. I cannot let that happen again. You must leave Thornfield, not just the manor, but the county. Go to London. Lose yourself in the crowds where her influence doesn't reach. With what money? Eleanor asked practically. I have no savings, no references without Mrs. Hargrove's approval, which she'll certainly withhold. Beaumont moved to the bookshelf and pressed a hidden catch, revealing a small compartment containing a leather pouch. I prepared for this possibility after Sophia, he said, handing her the pouch. It clinked heavily with coins. There's enough here to take you to London and establish yourself modestly while seeking employment. Eleanor stared at the pouch, then back at Beaumont. You planned my escape before you even met me. I planned for the eventuality that another innocent might need protection from my mother, he corrected gently. I had hoped it wouldn't be necessary, that Father's research would yield results before anyone else became entangled in our family's darkness. And has it? Eleanor asked, hope flickering briefly. Has Lord Thornfield found a cure? Beaumont's expression grew troubled. He believes he has formulated a treatment that might work, but it requires components we've been unable to obtain, specifically blood, freely given by a Dampier during the waning crescent moon. Your blood, Eleanor realized, and the moon is in that phase now. Yes, but the ritual requires more than just my blood. It needs a conduit, a human who shares a blood bond with me, whose life force can channel the cure into my mother's system. His gaze met hers directly. Now that's what she fears most, not losing you to me, but losing herself if you help me complete Father's work. Eleanor felt dizzy with the implications. Is that why you wanted to create a blood bond with me? To use me in this ritual? No! Beaumont looked genuinely horrified. The bond was purely protective, a way to mark you as mine in the only language my mother respects. I would never involve you in the ritual without full disclosure of the risks, which are, he hesitated, death potentially, for both the conduit and the vampire. The Countess's writings were unclear about survival rates. Eleanor sank into a chair, overwhelmed. So my choices are to flee, hoping your mother doesn't hunt me down as she promised, or to risk my life in a ritual that might not even work. There is a third option, Beaumont said quietly. Complete our blood bond as intended, not for the ritual, but for protection. With my mark upon you, even my mother would be bound by ancient laws to leave you unharmed. Unless you died, Eleanor pointed out. If something happened to you, I'd be defenseless against her. Beaumont couldn't deny this. True. And there's another consideration. The bond works both ways. You would sense my emotions, my whereabouts, my hunger. His voice dropped on the last word, shame evident in his tone. You would be tethered to a monster, Eleanor. The use of her given name sent an unexpected warmth through her. You're not a monster, she said with sudden certainty. A monster wouldn't have protected me, wouldn't care about my consent or my safety. His smile was sad. Your faith is touching, if misplaced. A companionable silence fell between them, broken only by the occasional pop from the fire. Outside, the moon slid behind clouds again, casting the cottage into deeper shadow. Eleanor studied Beaumont's profile in the firelight, his aristocratic features, the unnatural pallor of his skin, the tension that never quite left his posture. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things often are, a beauty that warned rather than welcomed. The ritual, she said finally. If it worked, if we cured your mother, would it cure you as well? Father believes so, Beaumont replied cautiously. My transformation was incomplete, my humanity still intact. Removing my mother's influence should return me fully to the human condition, and if it failed, his eyes met hers, dark and fathomless, then we would likely both die. My mother is ancient now, powerful. Attempting to remove what she's become without success would provoke a retaliation beyond imagining. Eleanor took a deep breath. I want to try. Beaumont stared at her in shock. You can't possibly... I have nowhere else to go, she interrupted. Your mother will hunt me regardless of where I flee. At least this way, my life might serve some purpose. She leaned forward, her decision crystallizing with each word. Tell me what to do. Eleanor, this isn't... A tremendous crash interrupted him as the cottage door splintered inward. Lady Thornfield stood framed in the doorway, her nightgown billowing around her, eyes blazing crimson. Time's up, she announced, her voice terrifyingly calm. I've reconsidered my generosity. Why wait until dawn when I can end this nuisance now? Beaumont moved with inhuman speed, placing himself between Eleanor and his mother. You gave your word. Words are for humans, Lady Thornfield replied dismissively. I've evolved beyond such constraints. She glanced past him to Eleanor, her lips curving into a predatory smile. Did he tell you what really happened to Sophia Williams, child? How she begged for mercy at the end? How he watched, paralyzed with fear as I drained her dry? Don't listen to her, Beaumont warned, never taking his eyes off his mother. She twists everything. Lady Thornfield laughed, the sound like breaking glass. The bond he offers is a shackle, not protection. Once marked, you'll never be free. You'll feel his hunger as your own, his darkness seeping into your dreams. She took a step forward, forcing Beaumont to retreat closer to Eleanor. Ask him what happened to the others before Sophia. Ask him why he keeps this cottage ready for escape. There's no time for this, Beaumont said urgently to Eleanor. We need to complete the bond now, before she attacks. Lady Thornfield's smile widened, revealing elongated canines. Yes, by all means, seal your fate. Become tethered to a dying man. With blinding speed, she reached into her gown and withdrew something that gleamed silver in the firelight, a dagger with an ornately carved handle. "Mother, no!" Beaumont lunged for her, but she was faster, sidestepping his attack with supernatural grace. "Too slow, my son," she taunted, circling around him. "Always too human, too hesitant." With a flick of her wrist, she sent the dagger flying directly at Eleanor's heart. Time seemed to slow as Eleanor watched death approach in a spinning arc of silver. Then Beaumont was there, intercepting the blade with his own body. It sank deep into his chest, the handle protruding grotesquely as he staggered backward. "Beaumont!" Eleanor caught him as he collapsed, lowering him to the floor. Blood, darker and thicker than human blood, welled from the wound, soaking through his shirt. "Silver," he gasped, his face contorting with pain. "Blessed silver!" She knew. Lady Thornfield watched impassively from the doorway. "A mercy, really. Better a quick death than the half-life you've chosen." She turned her gaze to Eleanor. "Now for the maid who caused all this trouble." As she advanced, Eleanor clutched Beaumont closer, her mind racing. The journal had mentioned blessed silver as a component of the cure. The dagger now embedded in Beaumont's chest might be the very weapon they needed, if they could survive the next few moments. Beaumont's breath came in ragged gasps, his skin growing colder by the second. "Eleanor," he whispered, "the bond, quickly, only way." Understanding dawned. With one hand still supporting Beaumont, Eleanor reached for the fire poker she had noticed earlier. In a swift motion, she dragged its tip across her palm, opening a shallow cut that immediately welled with blood. Lady Thornfield froze, her nostrils flaring at the scent. "What are you doing?" Eleanor pressed her bleeding palm to Beaumont's lips. "Drink," she commanded. "Complete the bond." His eyes, clouding with pain, met hers in silent question. She nodded once, resolute. With the last of his strength, Beaumont's lips closed over her wound, drawing her blood into his mouth. The sensation was unlike anything Eleanor had experienced. Not pain exactly, but an intense pulling that seemed to reach beyond her physical body. A strange warmth spread up her arm and throughout her chest, a connection forming between them that transcended flesh and blood. Lady Thornfield screamed in fury, lunging forward, only to be repelled by an invisible force that surrounded Eleanor and Beaumont like a shield. She staggered backward, her beautiful face contorted with rage and disbelief. "What have you done?" she demanded. Eleanor felt Beaumont's consciousness brush against hers, his pain, his fear, his desperate hope all mingling with her own emotions. Knowledge that wasn't hers flooded her mind, the ritual, its requirements, the words to speak. She understood now what needed to be done. With steady hands, she grasped the silver dagger embedded in Beaumont's chest. "Lady Thornfield," she said, her voice stronger than she felt, "you should know that your son and I are now bound by the laws you claim to respect." The vampiress's eyes narrowed. "A blood bond doesn't make you untouchable, girl. Merely complicated to dispose of." "I'm not finished," Eleanor continued, slowly drawing the dagger from Beaumont's wound. His blood coated the silver blade, black in the firelight. "By the ancient laws of the Carpathian Countess, I claim the right of reversal." Lady Thornfield's composure shattered completely. "Impossible! You know nothing of our ways." But Eleanor did know. Beaumont's knowledge flowed through her, a gift of their newly formed bond. She raised the bloodied dagger, feeling power gather around them. "By blood freely given and silver blessed by faith, I invoke the right of return." Lady Thornfield backed toward the door, genuine fear in her eyes for the first time. "You'll kill him if you attempt this. The ritual requires preparation, components. We have everything we need," Eleanor replied, her certainty growing. The waning crescent moon had emerged from behind the clouds, its light streaming through the broken door to illuminate the cottage interior. "His blood," freely given through our bond, blessed silver provided by your own hand, and me, the human conduit." With a cry of rage, Lady Thornfield turned to flee into the night, only to find her path blocked by the imposing figure of Lord Thornfield. Blood matted his hair on one side, but his eyes were clear and determined as he gripped a crossbow loaded with what appeared to be a silver-tipped bolt. "Richard," Lady Thornfield whispered, her voice suddenly small. "You wouldn't harm me, not after all these years." "I would free you," he corrected gently, "as I should have done years ago before your transformation claimed your humanity entirely." Behind Eleanor, Beaumont stirred weakly. "Now, Eleanor," he gasped, "begin the ritual, before she escapes." Eleanor raised the dagger toward the moonlight, Beaumont's blood glistening on its surface. Words in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow understood, rose to her lips. As the first syllables left her mouth, Lady Thornfield screamed, a sound of pure anguish that shattered the cottage windows and sent birds scattering from nearby trees. The ritual had begun, and with it a transformation that none of them might survive. Moonlight bathed the cottage in an ethereal glow as Eleanor continued the incantation, each ancient word burning like fire upon her tongue. The dagger in her hands grew impossibly hot, yet she couldn't release it. Beaumont's blood now mingled with her own where it touched the open wound on her palm, binding them together in ways that transcended physical understanding. Lady Thornfield writhed in the doorway, her husband holding her firmly despite her supernatural strength. Her elegant features contorted in agony as the ritual words washed over her, each syllable seeming to strip away layers of the monstrous creature she had become. "Stop this," she gasped, her voice fluctuating between the aristocratic tones Eleanor knew and something older, something that had never been human. "You're killing me." "We're saving you," Lord Thornfield murmured, his voice breaking with emotion. "Josephine, please, fight for your humanity. Remember who you were before Hungary." Eleanor felt Beaumont's consciousness fluttering weakly against her own, a candle flame in strong wind, threatening to extinguish at any moment. The silver dagger had wounded him grievously, perhaps mortally, yet through their newly formed bond he channeled what strength remained into her, guiding her through the ritual his father had researched for years. "Don't stop," his voice whispered directly into her mind. "No matter what happens to me." The air in the cottage grew thick with an unseen energy, disturbing the fire and creating shadows that moved independently of their sources. The ritual words reached a crescendo, and Eleanor felt something tear inside her, as though her soul were being pulled from her body to serve as a bridge between the vampiress and her lost humanity. Pain, unlike anything she had ever experienced, ripped through her chest. She stumbled but remained upright, the dagger raised toward the moon that watched dispassionately through the broken door. Lady Thornfield's screams reached an inhuman pitch, and then silence. The aristocratic woman went limp in her husband's arms, her head falling backward as though all strength had abandoned her. For a terrible moment, Eleanor feared the ritual had killed her outright. Then Lady Thornfield drew a shuddering breath, her eyes fluttering open, no longer crimson but the deep violet blue they had been before her transformation. "Richard," she whispered, her voice small and confused. "What's happening? Where are we?" Lord Thornfield's face crumpled with emotion. "Josephine, is it truly you?" Behind Eleanor, Beaumont made a strangled sound, part relief, part anguish. She turned to find him deathly pale, the wound in his chest still seeping that unnatural dark blood. The ritual had worked for his mother, but the blessed silver continued its deadly work in his own flesh. "Beaumont!" she gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. "Hold on! Please hold on!" Through their bond, she felt his life force ebbing, the connection between them growing tenuous. Panic rose in her throat as she pressed her hands to his wound, trying desperately to stem the flow of blood. "Father," Beaumont called weakly. "It worked. Mother is restored," Lord Thornfield confirmed, lowering his disoriented wife gently to a chair. But at what cost? He hurried to his son's side, his medical training evident as he examined the wound with practiced hands. His expression told Eleanor everything she feared. The injury was beyond conventional treatment. "The silver is too close to his heart," Lord Thornfield said grimly. "If he were fully vampire, it would have killed him instantly. His human half is all that's keeping him alive, but it's failing rapidly." Lady Thornfield approached uncertainly, her movements lacking their previous preternatural grace. She looked older somehow, still beautiful, but with fine lines visible around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. "My son," she whispered, horrified recognition dawning on her face. "What have I done?" Beaumont's eyes opened, finding his mother's transformed gaze. "It's really you," he murmured. "After all these years." Lady Thornfield knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. "I remember everything, Beaumont. Everything I became. Everything I did." Her voice broke. "How could you ever forgive such monstrosity?" "It wasn't you," Beaumont replied weakly. "It was what the Countess made you." Eleanor felt his grip on life slipping further with each passing second. Through their bond, his acceptance of death washed over her, a calm resignation that terrified her more than any fear could have. "No," she said firmly, squeezing his cold hand. "I won't let you die. Not after everything we've survived." A desperate idea formed in her mind. Dangerous, perhaps impossible, but their only chance. She turned to Lord Thornfield. "The ritual worked in reverse for your wife. It stripped away her vampiric nature. Could it work in the opposite direction for Beaumont? Could we complete his transformation instead? Make him fully vampire to heal the silver wound?" Lord Thornfield's eyes widened. Theoretically, yes, a full vampire could eventually recover from silver poisoning near the heart, but the ritual would require a willing human sacrifice, Eleanor finished, someone who offers their life force freely. Understanding dawned on all their faces simultaneously. "No," Beaumont protested, his voice barely audible. "Eleanor, I won't allow it." "It's not your decision," she replied steadily. "The bond gives me the right. Isn't that the law of your kind?" Lady Thornfield nodded reluctantly. "A bonded human may offer completion to their dampier. It's sacred." "But you would die," Beaumont whispered, anguish in his eyes. Eleanor leaned closer, pressing her forehead to his. "Not necessarily. The Countess's writings were unclear about survival rates, remember? Besides, I have nowhere else to go." Lord Thornfield stepped forward. "There's another component to consider. A dampier who completes transformation through a bonded human doesn't become the monster my wife was. The bond humanizes the process. Beaumont would retain his soul, his essential self, a different kind of vampire." Eleanor murmured. Hope flickered within her. "How do we begin?" "We don't," Beaumont insisted, though his protest was weakening as his life ebbed. "I won't risk your life to save mine." Eleanor smiled sadly. "Through our bond, I can feel your desire to live, Beaumont. Don't deny it." She turned to his father. "Tell me what to do." With grim efficiency, Lord Thornfield explained the reversal ritual, a mirror of what they had just performed, but with opposite intent. This time Eleanor would offer her blood not as a simple bond, but as a gateway to transformation. "Once begun, it cannot be stopped," he warned. "And Eleanor, the pain will be considerable." "I understand," she said, her decision made. Lady Thornfield unexpectedly touched her shoulder. "Child, are you certain? I remember what it was to be trapped between life and death. It's not a fate I would wish on anyone." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "I'm certain." As Lord Thornfield prepared the components, the same silver dagger now cleansed of Beaumont's blood, herbs from the cottage's stores, a circle of salt around the dying man, Eleanor sat beside Beaumont, their hands intertwined. "If this works," she whispered, "what happens to us? To our bond?" His eyes, growing clouded with approaching death, focused on her with effort. "It would deepen beyond anything you can imagine. My thoughts would be yours, your pain, my pain. We would be connected until death, perhaps beyond. That doesn't sound so terrible, she said softly. A ghost of his sardonic smile touched his lips. You say that now. We're ready, Lord Thornfield announced, his voice solemn. Eleanor positioned herself as instructed, kneeling beside Beaumont with the silver dagger held between them. The waning crescent moon continued its silent vigil through the broken door, its light now taking on a reddish tinge that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Eleanor's heartbeat. Remember, Lord Thornfield cautioned, once the transformation begins, Beaumont's hunger will be overwhelming. He may not be able to stop feeding. You must be the one to break the connection when your strength begins to fade. Otherwise, he will drain you completely. Eleanor nodded, her eyes never leaving Beaumont's face. I'll know when. The reversal ritual began with words that seemed to invert the previous incantation, turning its meaning inside out. Where before they had called for restoration to humanity, now they invited the darkness to complete its work, but darkness tempered by love, by choice, by sacrifice, freely given. When the moment came, Eleanor drew the dagger across her throat with steady hands, not deep enough to sever major vessels, but enough to release a steady flow of crimson life. She bent over Beaumont, allowing her blood to touch his lips. For an instant he resisted, his last human instinct fighting against what she offered. Then survival overcame principle, and his mouth opened to receive her gift. The moment his lips touched her blood, Eleanor felt the change begin, not just in him, but in herself. The bond between them exploded into something vast and terrifying, a connection that seemed to span not just their bodies, but their very souls. Beaumont's consciousness rushed into hers like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her individual self in the flood of his experiences, his memories, his pain. She saw hungry through his eyes, the Countess's castle perched on a mountain cliff, dark and forbidding, felt his terror as the illness ravaged his body, his mother's desperate bargain with the ancient vampiress, the horrifying transformation that followed. 3 centuries of the Countess's memories cascaded through him into Eleanor, blood and violence and power beyond human comprehension. Beaumont's arms encircled her now, holding her against him with increasing strength as the transformation accelerated. The silver wound in his chest began to close, the poisoned flesh expelled by supernatural healing. His feeding grew more urgent, the gentle touch of lips becoming the sharp puncture of emerging fangs. Pain blossomed where he fed, radiating outward until her entire body burned with it. Still, Eleanor held on, enduring what must be endured. Through their amplified bond, she felt his remorse at causing her suffering, his gratitude for her sacrifice, his terror that he might not be able to stop. Not yet, she told him silently. You need more. Lord and Lady Thornfield watched in solemn witness, the former ready to intervene if necessary, the latter weeping silently for what her son was becoming, what she had once been. Eleanor's vision began to dim around the edges, her strength fading. She knew the moment approached when she must break the connection or perish, yet something held her there, a sense that the transformation remained incomplete, that Beaumont needed just a little more to survive the silver's lingering poison. Enough! Beaumont's voice thundered in her mind. With superhuman effort, he wrenched himself away from her, his face contorted with the agony of denied hunger. Blood, her blood, stained his mouth and chin, his eyes now a brilliant crimson that glowed in the dimness. Eleanor collapsed into Lord Thornfield's waiting arms, consciousness flickering like a guttering candle. She felt him press something to her throat, heard him barking orders to his wife to fetch water, bandages. But these sensations came distantly, as though through layers of thick wool. What remained absolutely clear was her awareness of Beaumont, now fully transformed, the silver poison neutralized by his completed vampire nature. She felt his horror at what he had nearly done, his fierce joy at survival, his consuming fear for her life. "Eleanor!" he called. His voice changed, deeper, resonating with power that hadn't been there before. "Stay with me! Please stay!" She tried to respond, but couldn't form words. Darkness pulled at her, promising rest from pain, from the overwhelming intensity of their bond. How simple it would be to let go, to slip away into that peaceful void. "Don't you dare!" Beaumont's voice commanded in her mind, anchoring her to consciousness. "You fought for me. Now I fight for you." Eleanor felt something new press against her lips. Liquid, warm, with a taste like copper and something else, something otherworldly. Beaumont's blood, freely offered in return. "A drink," he urged aloud, "just enough to heal, not enough to change." With the last of her strength, she swallowed the powerful blood. Immediately a strange warmth spread through her body, cauterizing her wound, replenishing what she had lost. Not enough to transform her as he had been transformed, but enough to pull her back from death's threshold. Hours passed in a blur of semi-consciousness. When Eleanor finally opened her eyes fully, dawn light filtered through the cottage's broken windows. She lay on the narrow bed, bandages around her throat, her body weak but intact. Beaumont sat beside her, his appearance subtly altered by his transformation. His skin was paler, his features more sharply defined, an otherworldly beauty that was both alluring and unsettling. But his eyes, when they met hers, were his own. Dark and intelligent, filled with relief at her awakening. "You shouldn't have risked so much," he said softly. Eleanor managed a small smile. "Neither should you." Lord and Lady Thornfield appeared in the doorway, the latter carrying a tray with broth and tea. The aristocratic woman moved with human awkwardness now, adjusting to her restored mortality. "She wakes," Lady Thornfield announced unnecessarily. Her voice held none of its previous cold authority. Instead, there was warmth, concern, and unmistakable guilt. "Miss Blackwood, Eleanor, I cannot begin to atone for what I did to you, to everyone." "You weren't yourself," Eleanor replied, her voice raspy from her ordeal. Lady Thornfield shook her head, tears welling. "I was enough myself to remember it all. Every cruelty, every feeding." She set down the tray with trembling hands. "I shall spend whatever years remain to me trying to make amends." Lord Thornfield placed a supportive hand on his wife's shoulder. "We both shall." He turned to Eleanor with grave respect. "You've given us back our family, Miss Blackwood. There can be no repayment sufficient for such a gift." Beaumont took Eleanor's hand, his touch cool but no longer ice-cold. Through their permanent bond, she felt his emotions, gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on you," Beaumont replied. "The bond between us is unbreakable, but it doesn't dictate your choices. You could still go to London, establish a new life. I would feel you across any distance, but you would be free." Eleanor considered this. Freedom, independence, a normal human life in the city. Then she looked at Beaumont's face and felt the answering pull in her own heart. "And if I chose to stay?" Something like hope flickered in his eyes. "Then we would face whatever comes together. My nature is changed, but not my essence. I will need blood to survive, but never again from unwilling sources." He glanced meaningfully at his now human mother. "There are ethical ways to exist as what I am. Difficult, but possible." "And us?" Eleanor pressed. "What would we be to each other?" A hint of his old sardonic smile returned. "Whatever we choose to be, Eleanor Blackwood, the future, for once, is unwritten." 1 month later, as autumn yielded to winter's first frost, Eleanor stood on the balcony outside her new chambers in Thornfield Manor's east wing. No longer a servant, but not quite a traditional lady of the house either, she occupied an unusual position in the household's transformed hierarchy. Lady Thornfield, embracing her restored humanity with zealous reform, had overhauled the servants' conditions completely. Fair wages, reasonable hours, and strict prohibitions against the abuses once commonplace under her vampiric reign. Lord Thornfield had returned to his medical research, now focused on understanding the physiological aspects of vampire transformation, hoping to help his son manage his new nature. And Beaumont, he was adapting. The bond between them grew stronger each day, a connection that transcended ordinary human relationships. He had converted the underground cellars into private quarters where he could retreat during daylight hours. Though he could tolerate indirect sunlight in moderate doses, one benefit of his controlled transformation through their bond. Eleanor sensed his approach before she heard him, that awareness of his presence that never faded. He joined her at the balcony rail, his gaze taking in the snow-dusted grounds stretching toward the forest where they had nearly lost everything. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly, a question he posed often, as though expecting her answer to change. Eleanor turned to him, reaching up to touch the face that had become as dear to her as her own. Through their bond, she let him feel the truth of her response. Contentment, purpose, and the deep attachment that grew between them with each passing day. "None," she replied simply. "This is where I belong." In the distance, the moon rose over Thornfield Manor, no longer a prison of secrets and suffering, but a sanctuary for two souls bound by choice rather than circumstance. The night embraced them, no longer something to fear, but a new beginning written in silver and blood.